morning. My name is Robert Palazzo. I am Assistant Grand Lecturer for the Grand Lodge of Freemasons for the state of Rhode Island and moderator for this program. I am pleased to have as my guest this morning Paul Kukowski, Director of Masonic Education. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and join you.
The Masonic fraternity is open to men of every race, creed, and culture. Men of every walk of life are members of our Masonic lodges. Over the centuries, men preeminent for their accomplishments in civil affairs, business, the military, and the arts have felt compelled to become Freemasons for the fellowship and the promotion of integrity and good citizenship that membership entails. Paul, we hear, read, and see a lot of Freemasons and the Declaration of Independence. Can you give us some insight into the Freemasons and the role of this historic event?
Yes, I can do that. Freemasons played a very prominent role. For example, there were 10 men of the 56 who signed the Declaration of Independence, and they were Freemasons, including a William Ellery from Rhode Island. There were 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons. And of course, there were 14 presidents of the United States who were Freemasons. And of course, I can go through the list, of which was George Washington, who was the first, James Monroe, who was the fifth, and of course there was Andrew Jackson, who was the seventh president, and of course he was also a congressman and a senator and a judge for the Tennessee Supreme Court. And as a major general in the United States Army, he became a hero, if we all remember the War of 1812. He was elected president in 1828 and re-elected in 1832. He was elected Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Tennessee from 1882 to 1824. He was also a Royal Archmason, and he also was introduced, believe it or not, another Freemason, Marquis de Lafayette, who helped George Washington in the Revolutionary War, and introduced him to the Grand Lodge of Tennessee in 1825. That's pretty nice accomplishments.
Yes, it is.
And of course, if we go down the list, there was James K. Polk, there was James Buchanan, there was Andrew Johnson, there was James A. Garfield, there was Teddy Roosevelt, he was the fellow that carried the big stick, there was William H. Taft, Warren G. Harding, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and of course there was a favorite of mine, which was Harry S. Truman. And he was the 32nd president of the United States, and he had to make some very critical decisions in history, including the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan, the Fair Deal, the Truman Doctrine, and also the Marshall Plan, in which George Marshall was the Secretary of Defense at one time, and also was the inventor of the Marshall Plan. Truman was willing to accept responsibilities for all kinds of difficult decisions that made him a very controversial president. When he was 24 years old, he was initiated in Belton Lodge, number 450 in Grandview, Missouri, in 1908. In 1940, he ran for the U.S. Senate and was elected as U.S. Senator, and at that same time was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Missouri, within reeks of each other of these prominent positions. Although in session with Congress, much of the time during that year was as Grand Master, but he always found time to be extremely active in Masonic responsibilities. He was a truly loyal member of the craft while he was serving as a candidate. As a matter of fact, if he went to a lodge meeting, you would find out that any Secret Service man who was not a Mason would not be allowed into the lodge room. Another interesting point about Harry S. Truman. In the 1948 election, both presidential and vice presidential candidates of the Democrat and Republican parties were all Freemasons. It was Harry Truman and a vice president candidate, Alvin W. Barkley. And for the Republican presidency, it was Thomas E. Dewey, and the Republican vice president, which was Earl Warren, who eventually became Supreme Court Justice. I dare say that it was probably one of the cleanest election campaigns that were ever fought. And of course, we go further, there was Lyndon Baines Johnson, who also was a Freemason. And of course, there was Gerald R. Ford.
It was an impressive list, to say the least. I also